understanding color profiles is one of those things in photography that gets often overlooked, but it is very important. So inside the Apple computers, in the applications folder is a utilities folder. Within that folder is a color sync utility. You all have this if you own an Apple computer. So inside this color sync utility, you can start to compare profiles. So the Adobe RGB profile. Now, if you're a serious photographer, you might want to research a monitor that actually displays in Adobe RGB. Most monitors display in sRGB, and most screens and web devices are all sRGB based. So this is what the sRGB gamut starts to look like. If you want to compare that to the Adobe RGB gamut, that's much wider. This is the gamut we often use for printing, but unfortunately we might not see all those colors on our sRGB monitor, but they're still in the file, we just can't see them until we output to a print. So what we see in print might look a little different than what's on the screen as a result. There might be some brighter or more vivid colors in the file that we can't see on a screen that's limiting our visual amount of gamut. So I recommend researching and trying to find an Adobe RGB monitor. This is very common for most photographers who are dealing with multi-output devices, including print, web, social media, things like that. So recently, in the past, I don't know, 5-10 years, Adobe has been working on displays that are high definition and they have a wider gamut. So that is using the Display P3 model. So you can see that that looks a little bit like Adobe RGB, but slightly different. So Adobe RGB is a wider gamut. Display P3 is a slightly lower gamut than that, but this is starting to be what we see for smartphones and smart devices is this Display P3 gamut. Lastly, the most generic gamut is going to be sRGB. Those are the most common gamuts that we will work with. Now, there is the gamut that has everything in it, and it's this gamut. Now, this is also known as Pro Photo. So I don't know why it doesn't carry the same name, but this is a very, very wide gamut of color. So this will give you, it's like having the largest box of crayons, and it's going to give you brighter blues and brighter reds and brighter greens and everything. But how will we know? We won't know until we might print this on a printer that can achieve some of these colors, but not all of these colors. So if you want the best, this is the best gamut that's out there, but it's going to be very different when you compare this to what's on your screen. So if this is your gamut that you want to work in, I'm going to say hold for comparison, and I'm going to click on sRGB. That's the only gamut we can actually see on our screen. That is very different. So when you go to print this, you're going to get a completely different result than what's on your screen because it's trying to print out colors that are somewhere out here that we can't even see on our screen, and we're going to get a very different result than what we're looking at. So this takes a little bit of time to understand and some trial and error for sure, but the main thing is that our screens can really only show us this on most computers. Our smartphones can show us this. Our printers are somewhere out in here, or maybe a little bit more, and then we can achieve a maximum of this amount. But again, where are we going to see that amount? And we might not see it until we print on a very, very high-end inkjet printer. That's the only printer that will replicate most of these colors, not all of them. But if you want all of the colors you can potentially have in an image, you can use this profile. But typically the industry standard is Adobe RGB, and then we convert down to the other profiles as necessary. So Adobe RGB is our main profile for most Photoshop work and post-production work, and we can always make it go down. If you start working in sRGB and you want to get more color out of it, it's just not going to happen. Yes, you can convert it to Adobe RGB, but it's still going to have the sRGB colors in it and not be that exciting of an image. So it's best to go large, and you can always size down in some respects. It's not sizing down, but you can always convert down. You can't really convert back up and get more out of your file. It's already been rendered with those particular colors. So hopefully this helps you see a visual representation a little bit of color profiles and how they compare to one another. And again, we've got web-based screen color profile. So if that's your output, you want to make sure that you are outputting in that sRGB profile. If you're going to social media, I might recommend display P3. If you're going to do some commercial work or print your image, Adobe RGB seems to be the closest to most printers, and also to go towards a client. Most clients want their images in Adobe RGB, and then they can print brochures. They can, also then convert it down for web usage and social media usage. If you're a fine art photographer and you're working with a fine art printer, a very expensive fine art calibrated printer bureau, then I recommend using ProPhoto and working with them closely about what kind of colors you can get out of your files when printing. Hopefully this helps demystify some of the profile differences that are out there. An add-on to this video is that we have a inkjet printer profile built for a specific paper. So this is for the Canon Pro 1000. This is on the polar glossy metallic paper. So this is a custom profile built for that particular printer with those inks and that particular paper. So looking at this as a gamut comparison, you can start to see the differences. If you're working in ProPhoto, you're really not going to achieve very many of those colors, and it's going to get clipped to only these colors when it outputs onto that particular printer on that particular paper. Now I can also clear the comparison here, and I can go to an Adobe RGB file and then say hold for comparison and then choose that paper. Now there are a couple colors that paper can do that Adobe RGB can't do. So I think you will be pretty safe and probably will not notice those little differences, but this might be a safer profile. They're very similar without that much being different. So I could also then switch over to the sRGB profile. Let's say I'll clear comparison, I'll say hold for comparison, and then I'll look at that particular paper. And there's quite a few colors that are outside of the sRGB profile, where I think it would be better to be working in Adobe RGB, maybe the ProPhoto RGB profile, but just understand all the colors in your file might not get represented when you're printing on something that has such a limited gamut kind of like that. So again, hopefully this makes sense that you have a visual representation of the comparison of what's achievable with this particular paper and printer versus what could be in your file.